The space here. All right, thank you very much for honoring that. Thank you so much. My name is Blessing Afolabi, and I would like to welcome everyone to the 9th anniversary and 108th edition of the Power Dialogue. This edition is sponsored by the African Climate Foundation in partnership with Next Year and the Electricity Hub. And we've been doing this for 9 years, and it's been a very exciting journey so far. And today, as always, we'll be discussing a very crucial and important topic, preempting resilience for accelerated renewable energy scaling. And the objectives for this discussion is to focus on ways to enhance technical skills for integrating renewable energy into the grid. We'll also discuss, address the limitations around project financing and also tailor case studies to highlight best practices in expanding Nigeria's renewable energy capacity. Our experts are ready, but before we invite them on stage, I'd like to welcome the Next Year team to present their report that speaks to the topic. Please, with a resounding round of applause, let's welcome Busayo Omofe on stage. Thank you. Please, we can do better. I know it's cold, but thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. Oh, wow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Busayo Omofe, as Blessing stated. I'm a consultant with Next Year. And first of all, I would like to say a very big thank you to African Climate Foundation. They sponsored this program and this project entirely. So the brief overview of the project is to see that we are able to integrate renewable energy in the grid. Basically, it's to see the feasibility of renewable energy's adaptability in the national grid. And also is to see that we're able to equip the sector stakeholders with the necessary skills they have. So some of the process we undertook in getting this work done, in preparing this report. And let me just state it out there that the QR code is there. You can, first of all, fill the survey. Having filled the survey, it automatically registers you to get access to the report once the report is concluded. So aside presenting this report, we also want to get feedback from you to hear your opinion on what you think on the feasibility of renewable energy in Nigeria. The title of this project is Preempting Resilience for Accelerated Renewable Energy Scaling. So first things first, Kenechukwu, do you want to project the slides? Thank you. So first things first, we need to discuss the performance of the grid. So next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, the grid performance, our capacity versus output. So we have the installed capacity of 13,000 megawatts, but only 45,000 megawatts is being dispatched, which is poor compared to what we need in Nigeria, which is very, I don't want to say very appalling, but like that's the situation. And looking at how the global rate of civilization is accelerating and electricity is an integral part of this development, Nigeria is seriously underperforming. It's also the transmission loss factor. So this is the average lead. Micro says that we shouldn't be doing less than more than 7%, but Nigeria is doing 9.2%. The frequency is also there, the voltage. So the voltage is also not stable. So the average for 2024 is ideally it's supposed to be 330 kV, but like the average we've been having below and we've been having above. Also the grid collapse. I think this is a very popular one that everybody knows. Any small thing, even people not in the sector, they'll say, oh, the grid has collapsed. They don't even understand how it works, how it happens. But the next thing everybody knows is the grid is collapsing. So that's another challenge. That's the status of the performance of the national grid. So on the key challenges, we have frequent outages, which is hindering the performance of Nigeria's socioeconomic development. So it's not even just about the efficiency of the power sector. It's not even just about the economic performance of the power sector, but like across other value chains in Nigeria, which is very bad as well. Aging infrastructure. So everybody says that, oh, TCN infrastructure is about 50 years, but I think it's older than that because I did some research, and since we had electricity in Nigeria from 1896, I mean, I've not seen where they actually said, oh, they changed something entirely. I think it's just refurbished, refurbished, refurbished. So I think it's actually more than 50 years. So basically, we have older equipment. The next thing is we have vandalism. I don't think I need to speak too much on vandalism because across both from the discourse, the transmission, it's always happening, even to the point of electricity theft. So that's also vandalism. And technical losses, we have very high ATC and C losses. Next year is currently undergoing another research, and we got to see the amount of losses that people have. The discos are suffering, and I'm just like, wow. So where does profitability now come in if this is the amount of losses they are getting? Next slide, please. So technological and institutional reforms is something we have identified. If we need to see that these challenges are taken care of, if we need to see that this great performance is better than we want it to be. And a lot of, from my understanding and from the reports, from the results we've gotten from our research, a lot of the bulk of the work is on TCN actually. And I'm thankful that TCN has been unbundled. So we know that it's strictly NISO that needs to manage the system operators and the technological development as well. For instance, SCADA. And I'm very happy that the Electricity Act already says that, oh, we can unbundle SCADA and unbundle TCN, which is going to manage the SCADA systems and all of that, right? And it's about, I think it's about $56 million that was budgeted for the deployment of SCADA systems. It's in the report. Don't worry, it's in the report. Then other grid technology like StatComs, things to measure stability, and even also some of these old technologies, we can't keep refurbishing parts by parts. We need to change some of them holistically. And now I know the next thing is these things are not cheap. How do we get financing? But I think the experts in the room, our panelists, they'll take care of that. Next slide, please. Now the Electricity Act and decentralization. So to see the feasibility of renewable energy in Nigeria, the Electricity Act actually plays a huge role. First of all, Electricity Act guarantees states to transmit, distribute, and generate electricity. So now each state has, so it's not entirely on TCN, yeah. We can work with TCN to get that done. We can work with NISO rather to get that done. But the bulk of the work is not entirely on them. State governments can now take initiatives. And again, Electricity Act also says that each state must generate renewable energy. So definitely we need to find a way to integrate renewable energy into the system. Also, the national frameworks. I just want to point out that the IRP is a very crucial part if you want to understand how renewable energy is going to work with the grid, especially the decentralization aspect. Next slide, please. Yeah, renewable energy integration. So we chose to work with solar and wind. And I know the question is coming from me, why wind? Because everybody's quick to point out the Katsina project that failed, but we'll get to that. We're using solar because solar has very high radiance in Nigeria. And most of all the renewable, solar has been tested and trusted, although there's still some issues, but solar has been tested and trusted in Nigeria. And that's why we have experts from JA Solar to come and tell us how we can actually make this thing go, to address the challenges that we might have with solar energy. You know, and there are also large-scale projects that have been announced. For instance, as it says on the screen, the Jigawa 1,000 megawatts project, the Agungu 5,600 megawatts projects as well is also there. And I know there are some personal states that are also driving initiatives to like take on large solar scale by creating renewable energy parks, etc. Even some offices, from federal offices are also trying to take this initiative. I know REA, they're trying to scale up seriously. So there's potential for solar to be integrated into the grid. We just need to know how to do it, which brings us to the discussion of today. So the challenge is now grid inflexibility. Back to the challenge of the previous slides that I have mentioned. We need to find a way to refurbish these technologies or integrate new technologies that be able to accommodate renewable energy. We actually did some interviews. We spoke to some people and they made mention of how like this grid, it can't just, somebody specifically said we are still pouring water on our grid. So it can actually perform. So integrating renewable energy that is a very delicate infrastructure might not work. And again, to ensure like the sustainability of renewable energy, we need to back it up with like battery systems. grid cannot even accommodate renewable energy. So that's another challenge. Infrastructure gaps have already been stated. Financing barriers. So in as much as we are quick to say 90%, solar has been cheaper by 90%, yada, yada, yada. There are grants, there are financing platforms, financing models to support this renewable energy initiative. It is still not as cheap as it should be, especially to the Nigerian, I don't want to say African context, because some African countries are making this work, especially North African countries. So specifically to Nigeria, it's not as cheap as we make it. I'm sure a good percentage of the people in this room still use fossil fuels to electrify themselves. So yeah, solar is not as cheap as, so now imagine federal institutions. I know the federal government, they really rely on the private sector to ensure these things, to ensure the stabilization of renewable energy integration and development, right? So like, are the financing models, are they capable enough? Are there incentives to back up this financial gaps enough? Are there basically, are there financial tools to sponsor the vision of renewable energy integration in Nigeria? So that's something we also need to address. Then distribution strain. With the current grid, we're still talking about how like we're suffering high percentages of ATC and C losses. I'm seeing 60-something% from some discos, 40-something%, which is quite high, right? So we need to be able to address these things before integrating renewable energy into the grid. Next slide, please. So now my favorite topic, wind. I mean, I like wind energy because it's a very niche. It's not so new. It's not so new because like we've done research in Nigeria, right? We've seen how we've tried to make it work, but everybody's so quick to fail. And I want to ask an honest question, right? Once you tried something the first time and it failed, I don't think that stopped you from trying again. For instance, now the ladies, let's say you went shopping and you tried the shoe and it wasn't your size. You look for something similar that works for you. You just find something that works for you. So I think we need to give wind energy that benefit of doubt in Nigeria. Wind energy is one of the fastest growing renewable energy technology globally. I think there's a report that said by 2030, the wind and the global wind energy sector is going to watch about $217 billion. But as of this morning, I changed, like that perspective changed, because we have companies like NextEra that are doing $117 billion as their market cap as of 2025. So that's to tell you how like lucrative wind energy is. And Nigeria has about 10,000, we have approximately, I think 10,000 megawatts worth of wind energy. So that's to tell you that we have a lot of wind energy potential in Nigeria, right? And if one company is already doing 117.29 billion dollars, I wonder how much more Nigeria can make. So I did a quick analysis this morning just to like understand the profitability for Nigeria. So if we have wind energy capacity of approximately 30%, because I don't think we want to use wind energy, and we also have let's say we're selling the tariff for wind energy is like 16 naira, right? We have we're using wind energy for 4,500 hours in a year. And yeah, by the time I did the analysis and everything, I figured out that Nigeria could be making averagely $900 million from wind energy for tariff as low as 60 naira. That's even cheaper than what the band A users are. It's a thing whereby you just have to invest first. I mean, it's a long term. This is not something you put your money and get it back next year. But in the long run, if you give it like 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to enjoy maximum benefit. So for renewable energy companies in the room, I think you should be looking at wind in Nigeria. People have also argued that, oh, hydro, why no hydro? But then we've seen hydro work in Nigeria, right? And again, back to my research, I saw that hydro failed at some point in the earliest stage, days of NDA, Nigerian Dam Authority. Hydro failed at some point. They had to keep working on it till it's perfect. So I think that's the benefit of doubt we need to give wind energy. And I know there's a problem of intermittency, land use, etc. But there's a way we can mitigate these challenges. So at some point, I think 2 years back, we had the session in Power Dialogue that spoke about managing energy transition vulnerabilities. It's about mitigating these challenges, creating a solution that works for both the inhabitants of this community. For instance, if it's an agrarian community, you can't tell them that, oh, we want to put wind farm. You have to give them transferable skills or give them alternatives. So these are the kind of things, behavioral, economical parts that we need to think of when we're trying to get these things done. Yeah, so policies also, I mean, policies always say less support renewable energy, including wind, biomass, hydro. But like most of the things we see is solar. That's because like, I don't think the policies, they back up wind energy technology as much as they need to, as it should be done. The Nigerian Wind Energy Council is currently working to see that we get as much. I don't know how many people know about the Nigerian Wind Energy Council, but this is one of the organizations that next year is incubating to see that we drive wind energy policy forward. It's being currently sponsored by the African Climate Foundation. It's also being sponsored by Global Wind Energy Council. Next slide, please. So benefits and barriers. So clean energy diversification is already, I don't think I need to explain that. The market catalyst, I gave you the example of how wind energy can be very lucrative, especially for state governments. The policy and financial barriers, I already stated that. Hybrid solutions. So we need to find a way. That's another thing we need to do. If we want to integrate renewable energy into the grid, we need to find a way to create hybrid solutions. So these challenges are stated as challenges because we can find a way. That's one of the reasons we're having this conversation today, because we can find a way to make it work. Next slide, please. Yeah, lessons from other countries like Kenya. So India, I'll start with India particularly. India has 5 national grids, and they have about 151 gigawatts of renewable energy in the grid. So this just proves to us that, yes, we can do it. The next slide is going to be talking about integrating renewable energy grid. And I just want to refer us back to the integrated resource plan, where we have 4 zones according to distributions of the DSCO. If you read from page 24 of the integrated resource plan to 32, it's to explain to you how we can diversify these resources to see how we can make them work for each zones and how it can be designed. So lessons from Kenya. Kenya is like divided by 5 of Nigeria, because the population in Kenya is about 50 to 60 million people. Meanwhile, somebody said that Nigeria is pushing to be like India by the year 2050. I really hope that's not going to be our case, because I don't think we have the land mass to accommodate that amount of people. But if Kenya can make it work with that small sample size, so how much more each of these zones in the subgrades? So if zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, let's just say divide by 250 million divided by 4, that's averaged about 50 to 60 million people in each grid. So that means definitely we can make it work. Yes, and Kenya also has like a very good financial models, investor confidence. That's why I'm very jealous of people from Kenya, because any small thing, the conference is happening in Kenya. Any small thing, the funding is going to Kenya. Any small thing, they're signing MOU. In fact, right now, the UN is moving their African headquarters to Kenya, which just shows that there's something they're doing that is working. That is why we need to learn from Kenya. Next slide, please. My time is almost spent, so I need to, I've already spoken about the zoning and regional grids. Next slide, please. Investment and financing. So most of the recommendations go from our stakeholders. We need to find a particular financing model that works. And this is not saying that we carry what they're doing in maybe US and bring it down to Nigeria, but contextualizing it to Nigerian solutions. So not just the power sector, we need to integrate other socioeconomic aspects like health, agriculture, rural economy, etc., to ensure this works. Stakeholder recommendation, they spoke a lot about grid reinforcement, hybrid solution, creating specific policy roadmaps to support wind energy and renewable energy integration into the grid. Let it not just be, but it needs to be like, say, oh, this is how we need to do it, and this is how we need to get it done. This is what we need to do to get it done. Leveraging decentralization. We spoke about decentralization already. Institutional capacity. So now I'm going to invite our panelists to come and address the stuff. I know you have questions, you have contributions to make, but that'll all be done during the question and answer period. Thank you. So the moderator. Okay, I would send another one that'll be. Thank you. Somebody just made a comment that the QR code isn't working, so the new one is going to be uploaded on the screen. Thank you. So, honorable moderator, Olayemi Arowolo, she's the best person in this room, in my opinion. Incredibly smart, incredibly efficient. I'm so happy to be working with her. Please, a round of applause for her.
Thank you very much for the hi, Fusaya. Good morning, everyone. It's such a privilege to have you with us this morning. Like Busayo already said, we're discussing a very important topic, preempting resilience for accelerated renewable energy scaling in Nigeria. And like she said, our main objective is actually to focus on how we can enhance technical skills, enhance innovative grid management, manage the finance and regulatory aspect of what all of this is about. And with me today, we have very amazing people to discuss this topic. We're going to be asking them a few questions. And after a while, we'll open the floor to everyone who has questions to also ask questions and make your contributions, actually, because I believe there are a lot of, amazing people in the room today to, chime in on this topic. So very firstly, I'll be welcoming up stage. Apologies. I'll be welcoming up stage Mr. Dr. Yusuf Ali. Dr. Yusuf Ali is the Commissioner for Planning, Research and Strategy at the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. He was the Special Assistant to the President on Power Regulation in the Office of the Vice President. In this capacity, Dr. Yusuf advised senior members of the Nigerian federal government on far-reaching power sector reforms. Before taking this role, he worked in the Tony Blair Institute's Middle East practice. He undertook policy consulting work, helping leaders in the region analyze their options on the broad array of issues. Before joining the Institute, Dr. Yusuf worked as a management consultant at the office of the Nigerian Office of McKinsey & Co. from 2017 to 2019. He completed his PhD in energy policy from the University of Cambridge, focusing on the Nigerian power sector. He has a Master's of Philosophy in Nuclear Energy from the University of Cambridge and a Bachelor's in Engineering in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from the University of Manchester. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly welcome upstage with me, Dr. Yusuf Ali. Thank you. Please keep it going until he gets off stage. Thank you. You're welcome anywhere works. Thank you. All right, second today we'll be welcoming Engineer Emmanuel Oguche. He is a distinguished energy sector leader with over 17 years of proven success in transforming utilities, accelerating operational efficiency, and driving sustainable energy growth across Africa's power value chain. His career spans public and private sector engagement, making him a sought-after advisor to government, development institutes, and energy companies navigating complex reforms and growth challenges. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical electronics engineering from Enugu State University and an MBA in finance from the University of Port Harcourt's Business School. He's a registered member of COREN and a member of NSC. He's a respectable voice in the energy sector. He has worked with leading international agencies and donor-funded programs to design and implement power sector reforms. His efforts have been contributed to institutional capacity building, integrated electrification planning, and the deployment of scalable business models for energy access, especially in underserved regions. Engineer Emmanuel brings a unique blend of technical depth, regulatory insight, and financial expertise. He is a passionate advocate for data-driven, inclusive, and resilient energy systems that power African development ambitions. So this morning, kindly welcome with me upstage, Engineer Emmanuel Oguche. Thank you. And finally, this morning, we'll be welcoming Mr. Moses, Engineer Moses Ezirim. He's a seasoned senior electrical engineer specializing in renewable energy systems with over 10 years of experience in electrical design, project execution, and technical leadership. He has delivered and managed a wide range of preliminary projects designs across Africa and West Africa, including solar PV systems exceeding 60 megawatt peak and battery energy storage systems of over 2 megawatt hours. He has a solid academic foundation in electrical electronics engineering and an executive MBA, which has helped him combine technical depth with strategic project and stakeholder management. His career spans roles such as solar design engineer, senior project manager, and field service engineer, including leadership roles in project planning, system design, risk mitigation, and quality assurance for utility scale, CNI, and telecoms power systems. He is a registered current engineer and an active member of NSC and NIEEE. With strong leadership, communication, and analytical skills, he thrives on delivering complex projects efficiently while driving innovation and sustainability in Africa's energy landscape. So with me today, kindly join me welcome Engineer Moses Ezirim. Thank you. Please keep it going till he climbs off stage. Thank you so much. All right. Before I continue, I'll kindly ask that for, better communication and to ensure that we all listen attentively, let's try to keep our phones on silent so that we don't interrupt the panelists or, disturb the people beside us who are listening. Thank you so much. So this morning, I'll be starting off, with the very objective of this session, which is enhancing technical skills for Nigeria's electricity supply industry, particularly in renewable energy. So my first question will be going to Engineer Yusuf Ali. Dr. Yusuf Ali, sorry. So I would like to ask that as a regulator, as somebody who's regulating the sector currently, what will you say your view is on the feasibility of integrating large-scale VRE into the Nigerian national grid? I mean, what do you think about that as of today, from a regulatory perspective?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think this is a very important discussion to have. I note that in Nigeria, generally speaking, we're very good at setting targets. So for example, we have a commitment to net zero by 2060, but we're not so good at mapping out the way and having what I'll call execution discipline to bring it to life. So I think discussions like this are very important to, bring things to the fore so that we can be ready. Because before we know it's going to be 2030, that's already almost a quarter of the way to when the promise was made for us to go net zero by 2060. Now, with regards to your question around the feasibility of VRE systems on the national grid, I would like to address it from two angles. I think there is the technical feasibility and there's economic feasibility, right? So if I start with technical feasibility, the first question is around what is the quality of the network? I note that when the presentation was being made earlier, there was a comment made around the fact that all Nigerians are familiar with grid collapse, et cetera, right? The fact that the network is, over 50 years old. I'm not here to confirm or deny that. I think just like any network, it's been expanding at a very fast rate. And I would say perhaps the challenge we've faced is that there hasn't been sufficient deliberacy around replacing old infrastructure. So we just go around expanding. So you have areas now that have very new infrastructure, but very low demand. And your super highway, so to speak, now have aged infrastructure. So I think that's one thing that we have to consider when we talk about the feasibility of VRE systems. Second one, obviously, is about system balancing. I think I've explained somewhere before, grid collapses, they sound worse than they actually are, right? What's a grid collapse? It basically just means that at some point, the frequency on the system is at a high level of imbalance, right? Typically arising from a reduction in available generation compared to the load that is on the grid, right? And so when that happens, you have all your systems shutting down to protect themselves on the GenCo side. So that cascades the challenge that you're facing. But in our context, that's going to be very important for VREs because unlike, hydro or thermal systems or nuclear, for example, where you have predictability, you have actually not even predictability, you have control on when you power them on and off. With VRE systems, you don't have control. right? You can forecast when the sun will be out and how much of it will be out. But in reality, you don't know. If, for example, the provider says, okay, by tomorrow noon, the sun will be out fully, I expect to produce 500 megawatts. All of a sudden, there's cloud cover, right? And that's up to 200 megawatts. That will have an impact on how the grid reacts and so on. So the SCADA system is going to be essential for you to, be able to have any sort of like VRE integration at a high level without compromising the grid stability. I think on the economic side, I want to look at two things. The first thing is, what is the commercially viable demand to take on more generation? So while I appreciate the discussions around, Nigeria needs to do more generation, we need to do this and that, I think when you look at the data, you would actually be hard-pressed to justify any new investment in generation today, right? We issue quarterly reports and annual reports from the commission. What you find is that what you would say maybe absorptive load of the system that we can pay for today is somewhere around like 4,000 megawatts. Honestly, anytime the grid provides more than 4,000 megawatts and the utilities are forced to take the load, when you look at their commercial performance, there's a big decline because they are being forced. And I'm sure there's a gentleman from AEDC here, and he's been in Port Harcourt, he'll be able to say more about this. What you find is that when you have to pump more energy to areas that are not commercially viable, then, what's the point? And now, obviously, we're trying to transition away from this single buyer model, from embed. There's an intention for there to be trading bilaterally between the gencos and discos. Discos are going to require commercially viable customers. Otherwise, they're not going to use their own money to supply power to people that are not willing to pay. So that's something that we need to consider as well. Second thing, and I'll close on this, is around what is the cost competitiveness of VREs versus conventional technologies in Nigeria, right? I was in Turkey last week, okay, and went to see, there's a company called Epiash. That's like the trader that they have in Turkey. And so there were discussions around, so they showed us the energy mix, and we're looking at the mix, and somebody said, oh, how come you have like 30% coal? And the guy was like, because we have to be alive today to worry about tomorrow. So he gave an example of Germany, after the Fukushima nuclear disaster of 2011, I think Germany got on a very aggressive trajectory to wind down their nuclear program. And they said they would also wind down the coal program, okay? And that was going well. But all of a sudden in 2022, when there was the war in Ukraine and the gas supply to Europe was disrupted, Germany went to open all the coal plants and fire what they had to fire. So the point is, while Nigeria, obviously we have to be ambitious, and nothing says that we have to follow the footsteps of the previous countries in development. The whole purpose of, coming behind someone is that you can learn and can potentially leapfrog. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of our own foundational needs, and we should plan our systems to ensure that they meet our needs in the near term, and then, we then have a basis to worry about the go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf Ali. I mean, that's so profound. I mean, he talked about the challenges, part of what we also said during our presentation, the fact that the infrastructure currently is aging, right? I mean, that has to be worked on. There has to be a significant investment in infrastructure in the transmission network. He also spoke about the SCADA systems. We have to be able to monitor, before you can think of injecting VR into the network, you must be able to monitor what you're injecting, because VREs are not like the conventional power generation that currently happens. So that also has to be, really taken care of in terms of frequency, voltage, all of that. That has to be really, really very, very on par. He also mentioned the economic viability. How economically viable is this? And I think I just want to hold him on that and then just move over to Engineer Emmanuel for a bit. So I want to ask you, I mean, how would you assess the economic viability of integrating hybrid energy projects into the national grid? I mean, what do you think about it from an economic standpoint?
Yeah. Thank you. And can I use that? Okay, it's working now. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So cost or economics of scale as far as energy cost of energy is concerned is something that is benchmark on a particular process. So basically, you look at your production cost. From the context of production cost, you can also now do what they call least cost of energy, and from there compare with other sources of energy to be able to determine whether this pathway is most efficient or not. So to establish that, you need to do there are some components that have to do with CapEx, where you need to look at the equipment, look at, we don't manufacture the equipment here. You buy them, get them delivered to the site. All of these are cost related. Then you also do some operational costs that you need to inject as well. But ab initio to all of this is that there are some preliminary assessment activities that you have to do that will attract costs, i.e., you need to do a lot of studies. You need to study if it's solar you want to do, you have to do a base study of the solar, see the irradiance, see how viable the source of fuel is. You also now need to do that across several seasons to ensure that you establish your base fuel capacity. Then that will now what you're going to use to do reverse engineering, so the kind of equipment you need to bring and all of that. And so to bring it to the context of Nigeria today, we do not have sufficient data to be able to point us to where the viable renewable plant can be sited. So there was a project by NWEC and Owando some time ago to do the coastal regions, study the wind speed in the coastal regions. There was also another study that was done across the northern corridor, particularly to affirm the level of solar irradiance in those various areas. These are cost-related activities. Now, if you as an investor, you want to come into this space and you don't have the resource to do these studies, you have to get access to this data. Some of these data can be expensive. So from get-go, there are no base information or data that you can use to drive the economic viability, answer the economic viability questions. That's the first part. Then the second part now is that looking at the cost per unit of getting the assets, for the asset to come into the space, it's quite expensive compared to the conventional sources of thermal and hydro that is already stable in Nigeria. So basically saying that renewable option is going to be more expensive. It's actually more expensive than the conventional options, which is why if you want to look at it from the context of economics alone, it may not be the fanciest thing to say in the room. All right, so that which is also makes the case for the fact that government needs to intervene, perhaps in certain areas, provide some form of subsidies. There was one project that I know Enugu State tried to do at some point where they were looking at one of the pathways to make it economically viable, being perhaps providing land free to whoever wants to invest, so that they can reduce the cost of setting up the plant and of course producing power to the people. So from an economics context, large-scale solar, particularly at the commercial and industrial category, financially engineered to work, say, within 18 to 20 years, you could see some form of profitability around it. For wind, that is yet to be fully established, because the only viable wind plant that would have functioned well in Nigeria, which is supposed to be in Katsina, as we speak right now, there's no commercial viability pathway or window across that project. So for wind, it's going to be a bit difficult, but looking at it from a desktop approach, renewable energy integration can only be economically viable if there's a significant government subsidy or intervention in some of the cost components around it. So in summary, the grid as currently considered, thermal and hydro, is going to be significantly cheaper and more economical for the off-takers, particularly considering what the commissioner has said. Like he mentioned, I sit in AEDC's executive management. I see the numbers. I know how we're able to get even the revenue that we have. So I can also tell you what it's going to be like if we inject these other renewable sources without the level of subsidy that we'll need to make the cost affordable to people. So basically saying, VRE is a fantastic conversation. It breaches the environmental component. It also gives it's a sustainable way of getting power, but as it stands currently, it's very expensive, and economically, it's not the first as far as our source of energy generation in Nigeria is concerned for now.
Thank you very much, Engineer Emmanuel. I mean, I took a course recently, and part of what, I don't know, maybe my lecturers were being in their ideal world, sense, but part of what they mentioned was the fact that at some point in time, VRE and conventional energy would actually get to a level of grid parity, where the cost actually kind of like balances out. How soon we're going to get there, maybe that's a question for another day. But for now, let's just focus on the conversation for today. So I want to ask you, Engineer Moses, what grid technologies should be prioritized to integrate renewable energy into the grid? What kind of grid technologies can we prioritize? Smart meters, SCADA systems, exactly to be able to integrate renewable energy into the grid. And if you have any case studies, a real life example, maybe international or even in here in Nigeria, if that exists, that we can actually learn from, you can actually please share.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, talking about the priorities, I'm going to draw what the commission have said. We all have been talking about poor grid infrastructure, the reason why we have downtime. Now, just like he mentioned that when the generation is more than the load demand, then the frequency will increase, then that's the reason why you have downtime, or vice versa. So now, if we want to reach that, the first thing that we need to do first is to do an assessment, all right, to analyze the grid. And the way we can do that is to do a grid study. You get, so once you are able to do a grid study of the lines, look at the networks, look at the transformers, look at the cables, look at if there is a voltage drop anywhere. You can even bring, look at the RMUs, if there is any. All right, so after you've done that, then you can now decide, okay, I want to bring in battery storage. All right, because when you bring in battery storage, that will avoid the intermittency. That will avoid the grid collapse. Because by the time the generation is much higher than the load demand, all right, instead of the frequency getting increased, then the battery storage will inject, you understand? Then vice versa. So that is how to balance it. Then once we're able to prioritize the battery storage, then we can now decide that, okay, we want to increase the capacity. What else do we need to do? Then we can decide to bring in solar, all right, or any other renewable form. Then once you do that, then just to avoid thefts, ensure that investors are able to get return on their money, then and to reduce this ATCR loss, then you now talk of bringing in a smart meters. All right, so these are the priority, these are the equipments that you can bring in to prioritize what you want to do. Then talking about the country, I'm going to base it here in Nigeria because some developers are already doing it. All right, we see discos, giving out a particular community, to some developers, to handle. So what the developers do first is to do an assessment. They do a grid study analysis to ensure that everything is right before they go ahead and deploy. So you see them bringing in your solar, bringing in BESS, bringing in smart meters. So it's basically what they call interconnected mini grid. So we're already deploying that in Nigeria. So just to list the priorities in order, I would say we need to do the grid study first. Then after we've done that, then we can bring in battery storage. Then we bring in solar, then BESS. Then we also need a SCADA because data is very, very important. Because if you don't have data, there is no how you can upscale. You understand? And if I'm doing solar, for example, now I'm not limited to a particular capacity. All right. So I need to have it in mind that this is the capacity that I'm starting with. Just like engineer has said as well, that you need to look at the financial viability of the project. So once I'm able to start with a particular capacity, I need to upscale. And what can make me to upscale is the use of the SCADA. So the data, the SCADA rather will give me the data that I need to know which capacity do I need to upscale to. All right. So once we have that, you'll see that everything will go in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer Moses. From what you said, it's obvious that having advanced SCADA systems in Nigeria is something that should be non-negotiable. I mean, even for our normal grid system as of today, we really need an advanced SCADA system in the sense that you want to be able to tell real time what is happening on your grid, what's happening in your network. And that's one of the things that, having control systems, advanced SCADA systems is really, really going to help us achieve. Thank you so much for that. And on that note, I want to proceed to the next objective, which is to provide, focus on providing hands-on experience and innovative grid management with predictive maintenance. So I'm going to start again with Dr. Yusuf Ali. And I'll say from a regulatory perspective, what reforms are currently on the way for national and state level energy policies to support grid connected VRE integrations? Do we currently have, reforms or policies that are supporting VRE integration? Does that actually exist today? And if it doesn't, is there a plan to actually add that to what we currently have in the body of policy of the electricity sector?
All right. Thank you very much. I think, yes, the answer is that we do, but I also note that we are at the early stages of the journey, right? When I think of the reforms that are ongoing, that are pro VRE integration, to put it in that form, I can think of three key things that are ongoing, commenced over the last 1 year, that I would say, are leading us in the right direction. I think the first and foremost is the big one, is the issue of SCADA, right? I think there's consensus across this side of the room, and I presume everywhere, that without a SCADA system, there's a limit to how much VRE you can interconnect to your system, because otherwise the grid collapses will become just too frequent, right? So on the SCADA front, I think there's some good news in that. I think under the World Bank NETA project at the TCN, the SCADA scope that they are covering is expected to be completed by June of 2026. And by the end of, when they complete that scope, the expectation is that we would have about 175 out of the 230 substations, transmission substations, covered by the SCADA, providing about 80% visibility of the system and control. Now, one of the good things, so I had a meeting yesterday with the World Bank program lead on this. One of the good things is that they're looking to introduce or include some, AI. I don't want to use AI because AI is like too cliche, but some data, some learning, what's it called? Learning, exactly, machine learning functionalities that would enable the system to almost simulate the outstanding 20%. Because obviously, I've heard somebody say that SCADA is like being pregnant. You either have it or you don't have it, right? Obviously, in our case, unfortunately, the work required to achieve 100%, just like Pareto's principle, is going to be too much within the next about 11 months. So what we've agreed is that let's do all the work required to achieve this 80% visibility and control. They'll put this machine learning functionality to simulate the remaining 20%. So that at any point in time, the control center, either in Oshogbo or Gwagwalada, they will be able to, play around with the system and hopefully bring an end to this history that we have of, very unreliable systems. I think one thing to also note is that one of the key drivers of the commercial challenges of the grid actually is because of the low quality of supply. Now, low quality doesn't mean outages. It just means that industrial players, they are unable to connect their systems to a network whereby instead of operating at 240 volts, you can get as high as 250 something and get as low as 210 or something. Residential loads can accommodate that. I think all these ACEs and stuff, they are particularly built for this market to ensure that they are able to absorb such variations. But the industrial customers are unable to do that. That's why you have them off the grid. And it's very hard anywhere around the world to find utilities that are 90% based on residential loads, because the cost of collection is just not going to be worth it. You need to those big customers that you give 1-2 billion naira invoice for the month and they pay you no stories. If you collect 2 billion from residential customers, you probably have to invoice maybe like 4 billion, and then you keep going around to chase the money. So I think the SCADA thing is gonna, hopefully, the commission is actually playing a very, attentive role to ensure that the project is on track. And we are hopeful that once it is done, there will be a lot of, improvements in the overall grid management, which will then create a platform for us having discussions around larger scale VRE solutions. Second policy thing that is ongoing is the issue of the NIPSIP. I think late last year or early this year, the minister was able to get the NIPSIP done that was the requirement from the Act, right? And so what the NIPSIP seeks to do, one of the things it seeks to do is to provide some clarity on our vision for our network, our supply mix going forward. And I think there's a focus on renewable energy in the NIPSIP. But as I said, Nigeria are very good at planning. What needs to happen now is that somebody needs to take that NIPSIP and actually start implementing it in a way that would, catalyze what has been emphasized. the last thing that I would say that is really helping in this cause is the issue of the IRP, right? I think an IRP, I would say, is an enabler for the NIPSEP. So it's almost like a continuation. Because it's one thing for somebody to sit down in a room and say, okay, Nigeria 2030, I think there was a vision 30 gigawatts, 30% renewable. I can't remember by 2030, of course. Now, obviously, we are halfway through this decade, and I'm not sure we are on track for the 30-30-30. But what the IRP, I think, will be useful for is that it actually helps to convert theoretical thoughts into some sort of like, modeling that actually bring it to life, right? I know UK and I have supported NISO, NERC in developing the first IRP, the first outcome of it. And I think that was done in February of this year. I think the minister also was participated in the celebration of that. But I think what we're looking to do is that has been transitioned to NISO, right? And I think they have a mandate from the commission that every 6 months at least, you must revise your expectation of what is the least cost, electrification plan for the entire country. So I think by having that in play, you then have a situation whereby your renewable plans can be put to the test on a regular basis so that you can obviously figure out what is practical, what is not practical. And I think at least the IRP then creates a platform for us to have educated discussions. I think there was a point made by engineer around the fact that there's a data gap, right? Hopefully with the IRP in play, some of the data gaps that ordinarily developers will have to invest their own money to verify whether this is possible or not is something that will be, out of the way. And then we can then at least one step further along the journey of trying to bring the VRE project onto the grid.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really, really good to know. It's really amazing to know that all these things are, currently in the plan, in the works. I mean, the SCADA policy, the NIPSIP is that's already been rolled out. Implementation, of course, is going to happen, follow after very shortly, and all of that. So really, thank you so much. I mean, thank you so much. I also want to ask Engineer Emmanuel, what practical financing models do you think are feasible to catalyze, this integration of VRE into the grid? What models do you think people, the private sector, people who want to play in this sector can actually adopt?
So thank you, Yemi. So the thing is that we have broadly 3 frame models. We have the PPP option, we have fully IPP option.
Some people don't know what PPP is.
Okay, public-private partnerships, all right. And of course, we have the model where you have some form of government subsidies, basically, making the process more robust and bankable. But what I think is more prevalent now, considering the market as it stands currently, like he mentioned and like Commission also mentioned, there's significant renewable injection at the moment. Most of them around the CNI for the distribution voltage level, where you see, private sector people that are interested in the sector, coming together to integrate with the grid to complement the grid where the shortfall exists. There are several of those models currently ongoing at the distribution level. So for those ones, the business model is largely an IPP-based model. But where you see the public-private partnership come into place, when you now begin to talk about large-scale power, I talked earlier about Enugu State's plan to provide access to land almost free of charge. In fact, they have designated areas that they've marked for this sort of project. So cost of acquiring the land is off, and you have 100 years to use the property for this project. Now, so basically saying government either providing land or providing some form of rebate in terms of cost of finance, or even providing some form of tax holidays and all of that. Basically, government collaborating with investors to reduce the cost of production through PPP is the most, and I think is the most viable option going forward. And this is also can be supported with some form of financing instruments from the government, i.e. maybe providing some form of bonds or guarantees to whoever is going to be the lender, so that access to finance can be fast. And of course, financial close can also be as fast as possible. As it stands currently in Nigeria, most large-scale power projects in Nigeria take almost 24 months to reach a financial close. And that 24 months, a lot would have happened, all right? So government coming into it through a PPP option will provide a lot of comfort for everybody, both the lender, the borrower, provide comfort for even the off-takers that, okay, that since we have a government support, we don't expect a variance in the future that will affect our commitment to this project. So PPP is the best, I think, from my own experience. And I think so there's been a lot of sensitization in this sector, particularly around VREs for the past 2-3 years. There've been a lot of workshops. I think Nestle organized one 2 years ago. There've been a lot around, I know the commission also set up a process where they got consultants to do a study of the entire market, particularly at the POCs, price point of connections into the grid, to test how viable the assumptions around those potential assumptions, could be. So there's been a lot of interest in this sector, and that interest has also built confidence in the policy, from a policy perspective to the government side, where they can now handshake with investors to provide a PPP framework that can further drive down the cost of this investment. So I think that PPP as a pathway is what I can say now is the most viable pathway for financing VRE and renewable energy projects, particularly at the large scale level.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. So we're talking about, public partnerships with the private sector. So we're saying the government can't do this alone, neither can the private sector
Absolutely.
do this alone. It
Yeah.
has to be a partnership, and we have to ensure that those partnerships actually happen, right? So thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. That's very insightful. Engineer Moses, can I ask, how can state governments and regulators work more effectively with the private sector players? I mean, he just mentioned a very strong point on public-private partnerships. How can these partnerships happen? What do you think would ensure that this relationship is very well oiled?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So just like engineer has mentioned, partnership is actually key. All right. So if we're going to look at how the governments can partner with the private sector players, I'll be looking at the first one. We need to have a roadmap. All right. Let's set a goal for ourselves that, all right, this first quarter, this year, we want to hit 100 megawatts. All right. So then let's trickle down the capacity down to states. So once we have that, so it's just like saying that let the government, let them set a clear goals, so that everyone can go with the goals. Then secondly, I also want to say that we have a lot of bottlenecks. We have a lot of paperwork, we have a lot of meetings, so let's do away with meetings, let's do away with committees, let's get to action. All right. So I'm of this school of thought that let's hit that megawatt. You realize that Nigeria has not gotten to the point of hitting 100 megawatts, unlike our counterpart country. I want us to get there, and it can only happen if they can free up the space. And thirdly, you realize that the players that we have, the private players that we have in Nigeria here are few. All right. So we actually need a multiplayer, and how we can have that is to free up the market. Let's remove the subsidy. All right. Let's go for cost reflective and multi-tariff. So once you do that, you even realize that those in the rural area are even pay cheaper than what they are paying now. You understand? Let's be innovative about what we do. And once we do that, the market is going to free up. Then I also say, thank God for the electricity at 2023, at least it's a step in progress. So once done, I want to come down to the states. Now that we have every state can now, propose their own electricity bill, then I want to say that let the states, look into it very well. Let them ensure that their policies are well defined. Let them remove all the licenses. A developer, even a single developer, should be able to have his own house, like I can have my own house now, and decide that I want to generate using solar and sell to my neighbor. So there should be a policy that favors such person. All right. So I believe once we have such partnership, I believe everything is going to roll well. Then lastly, I want to say the finance, because you can't do this without finance. You understand? The cost of electricity is actually expensive. The cost of implementation, of these VRA is also expensive. All right. So I will say that the way the government, can support the private is through subsidy. If they can roll out finance, I believe it will work well. Thank you.
I want to jump on that too. Basically, the best way to do all of this is to come up with an integrated energy resource plan, whether at the national level, which you can have as, I think they did some work in that area within last year and last 2 years. Even at the level of the states, each of the states needs to have their own integrated energy resource plan. What that does for you is that it provides you a framework as to how to transit from where you are to where you want to be. It also gives you a bird's eye view as to how to strategically harness the resources around you. So if you are a state like Plateau, where the wind speed is quite significant, if you're developing your resource plan, you already know that the renewable option you should leverage on significantly is wind. And what that will now do is that it will help the other institutions in the state, i.e. Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Budget, Finance and Co., to strategically begin to engage perhaps OEMs out of our clients, where they can now come up with viable collaborative agreements that can enable the developer to come and invest. So basically what I'm saying is, if you go to GE, for example, I don't know if they do wind, I've not checked that, but if they do produce wind turbines, Plateau State government can reach out to GE and say, look, we have done a study of our entire market. Our market currently is at 100 megawatts. We want to grow it to 200 megawatts in the next 10 years. And to do that, we want to devote 30% of this additional generation to wind. And the reason why we're saying this is because we have seen the wind profile and we know this is going to work. Now, if you're afraid of security, we're going to provide security for you. We're going to provide access to land. Basically creating that enabling environment for the investors to now come and deal with project issues, not development issues, not security issues, not cost of finance. We have the likes of Infra Credit, Chapel Hill and Co. that can come and give you innovative financial support. But the government needs to take leadership in that area so that the investor can come and do good business. So this is both going to be at the national level and at the state level. And that's why I know Lagos has done a study to, basically they did the IRP in 2020, all right, done by, I think they got supported by USAID, I think. They did a study in 2020. And I also know that there's a need for review of that study. Enugu has done theirs. Anambra has equally done that. Katsina is working on it. Those sort of IRPs are very, very instrumental, because if you cannot have a clear line of sight as to how you want to transit from here to where you want to be, and the enabling support you need to put together to make this happen, the investor is almost, there's little the investor can achieve. And if he must take all these hurdles, the cost of production is going to be significantly high. So the state is at the center, the front, and at the rear of this transition program.
Thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. I mean, if the private sector participants see the support from the government,
yes,
then they will definitely want to play in the sector. I think that's very, very key.
Absolutely.
So the government should actually come up like Dr. Yusuf said earlier on, the IRP already exists. I mean, we need to start implementing all those things and start to ensure that we pull in the private sector participation as much as possible. Yeah. Thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. Okay, right now we'll just address crucial limitations around project financing, environmental impact, and supportive policies. So we're going over this again. I want to go back to Dr. Yusuf, and I'll say examining next role as the regulator. How prepared are Nigeria's current institutional frameworks to manage VRE variability and grid balancing? I mean, our frameworks, our institutions, how prepared do you think they are?
This is some form of like self-assessment, because unfortunately I'm part of the regulator that's supposed to be in charge. So pardon me if I'm a bit biased. But I think before I answer the question, I think on the issue of, financing and, should it be private sector or not, I would argue that the most important support that investors need from government is actually certainty, right? So while yes, government can help you with, secure land, they can do this IDEC, all of these things that will ensure that, it's very simple for you to do business. I think the most sustainable form of government support is just to let the market work. Because I think one of the challenges that we continue to face on the grid today is the fact that the government intervenes in a way that is effectively beyond its power to intervene. What do I mean? I think right now we are running a subsidy deficit month on month, anything from 180 billion to 200 billion. This has been the case, I think, for at least the last 1 year, since July of 2024, right? Now, what is more amazing is the fact that the government hasn't paid a dime. So I think on average, the Gencos, I can see a Genco here, Gencos on average are receiving only 38% of their invoices, right? Now, when you have such a situation, it obviously means that if you want to attract investment for any new generation, you have to put all the bells and whistles of partial rate guarantees and so on and so forth. If the market works organically, you don't have to find any enhancements, because the person that's coming to invest will do a survey of the market conditions. He will determine what is the risk premium he wants to put on his investment, and he will earn it. So I am a bit skeptical, because subsidies, Nigeria is not very, very wealthy, right? Let's be honest. People say, oh, Nigeria is a rich country with so much oil, whatever. I think Nigeria is like 8th largest oil producer in the world, but out of the top 8, probably have like largest population by a mile. I remember some analysis that was done that Saudi Arabia produces, I think maybe 4 times as much oil as we do at a lower cost than we do. And they have about a quarter of the population. So when you look at the impact of the oil per capita, it's almost 16 times, right? So Nigeria is a very wealthy country. So I think unfortunately, when you're not very wealthy, you have to cut your coat according to your size. So I think our subsidy ambitions have to be curtailed to the limit of our financial capacity. So that would just be my advice on the financing side. Now, on the issue of the role of NERC in terms of preparedness for the infrastructural frameworks, I think similar to what I said earlier, we are very good at having rules, having plans. So for example, now, if one of my colleagues is here, he can come and recite for you the network code, distribution code, Nessus code, grid code, all of those things. They exist. And I think to a large extent, if they were being implemented properly, it will put the grid in a very, very strong position to be able to, accommodate any form of technology. Now, the challenge, though, is that we are not implementing those things the way they're supposed to be implemented, right? And NERC is a guilty party. But in reality, when it comes to real-time grid regulation, when you look all over the world, it's not the work of the sector regulator. Typically, that's why you have like NISO. So that's why I personally, I was very, very happy that NISO finally was created. Because what NISO is supposed to be a quasi-regulator that deals with real-time grid governance and discipline, right? So I think we have finally set that up. And the hope is that we're giving them all the powers they need to be truly independent. The challenge you had when they were under TCN was that the head of grid, regulation, will report to the MD of TCN. So it's not going to work, right? So with this new structure, we hope that a lot of the enforcement of the grid code, right, of all the codes that exist, will be done well. And I'm pretty confident that if I actually enforce those codes to the full provisions that they are in there, I would say over 80% of our problems are solved. Ultimately, with new technologies will come new strains. And I'm sure all over the world, people are spending a lot of time to review even their codes in real time. Because, I'm an engineer, but I'm not like a core. So all this inertia or these things, the sort of challenges they bring onto the grid operations are things that the grid code that was developed in 2000 and even 2015 might not be able to deal with today. So I think our biggest problem is enforcement, which we hope that NISO will come and help us resolve. And once they do that, I'm confident that majority of the problem will be solved. And they'll continue to just revise our instruments to ensure that they are up to speed. Now, in terms of the frameworks that exist, right, that I think we are actively chasing up to at least try to bring some level of discipline into the system. One of it is this issue of free governor mode operations of the Gencos. One of the big challenges that we face with grid collapses is the fact that, I'm sure the engineers on the panel can explain more, but they are like relays in the system that are expected to help you cascade your failures. So the failure of a GenCo should be last resort. Unfortunately, because of the poor relay coordination and so on, and this is also just a result of poor grid discipline. Because if there was grid discipline, nobody would set their relays to outstrip their own ranking in the protection system. But now, so with free governor control mode, we hope that the GenCos would, no, we don't hope, we have directed, right? That GenCos have to install all relevant equipment so that gives the system even some more flexibility. Because right now, what you have is that if some GenCos do not set their own free governor mode operations, you have a situation whereby they don't react to grid dynamics. Maybe they're supposed to react. And then you then have other systems having to compensate and so on and so forth. I think we also have the economic merit order dispatch, which is a framework that I think would help support VREs. Because obviously, when you build a power plant, the mode of the ranking of what you dispatch will be based typically on what is the marginal cost, lowest marginal cost of dispatch. And the good about renewables is that largely once you put the infrastructure down, you know, it's you're home and hose in that sense. So with the economic method of dispatch that we have, that would also something that can also promote renewable projects if they can pass the fundamental commercial test in the first instance. I think there is also what we've done around trying to have fully effective contracts in the market. I think up until 2023, out of all the 28 grid-connected plants, only 8 of them had fully effective contracts. So there were any capacity payments when they were available but not dispatched. For renewable energy projects, it's going to be suicidal if you're not going to be any energy payments. Because it means that at any point, if for whatever reason you're not dispatched, and you are heavily capex anyway, you have very little variable cost. So a lot of the recovery should come from capacity charge, which is only possible if you have fully effective contract. So the commission is sort of steering the market towards having fully effective contracts, which I think will be helpful for them. And then the last thing I would say is just the fact that we're currently working on some with AEDC and the World Bank. They've written to the commission that they want to pilot an auction framework, right? I think international best practice has indicated that the best way to get value for your renewable energy project is through auctions, right? In this case, in Nigeria, we haven't really done much of that. So some work is ongoing now with AEDC. I think they have like 2 sites in Abuja that they want to put, 10 megawatt grid connected solar solutions. So hopefully if we can sort of like stress test the auction framework and build it up, it's something that will be ready then in time for when we are ready to accept larger scale projects. We can then run the same framework to hopefully obtain very good value for the Nigerian citizens.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf. I mean, very quickly, because of time, I just want to move to Engineer Emmanuel and ask, what would you consider that one thing that is very essential for Nigeria to do today to ensure that VREs are able to get integrated into the grid? What would you say that one thing is?
The first is we must carry out intense studies across the entire grid, particularly at the point of injection to the grid of these various VRE points. And so for you to do that, you have to do comprehensive steady state studies, transient studies, identify the weak points, reinforce those weak points, right? So you need to do a comprehensive study that will guide you as to how and where to segment your grid and of course your injection point. That has to happen. Now, the next thing that will need to happen now also is we need to look at our transformation philosophy. So at TCN, typically our equipment are unidirectional, not bidirectional. So what I mean by that is you have transformer that either step up or step down. They cannot step up and step down at the same time. So, and for VREs, sometimes where the high irradiance exists, where the high potential exists, the local load demand for that community may not be able to take off the entire capacity of the plant. So you now need a substation that the VRE can connect at the daytime and inject energy, step it up to the grid, so that at night, the system could reconfigure itself to take from the grid and serve the local load. So that sort of transformation philosophy needs to be tinkered around. And that's purely a policy consideration for TCN. Now, the other thing is SCADA. SCADA is the next thing, right? SCADA is like you want to fly from Abuja to Lagos and there's no radar system. So you're basically going to crash, right? The grid is already very, very fragile with all the issues that we know: obsolete equipment, weak infrastructure, lack of proper governance, and like what Commissioner was saying just now, the governance, the policy around freeing the governor of the generators, all of that, the commission has started driving it, but before night, it wasn't taken into full, taken serious in the past. So, but what the SCADA will do now is that beyond the freeing of the governor, the SCADA will basically tell you how much to generate, when to generate them, where to dump where to take the energy to, what sort of technical constraints you will envisage as you're transporting this energy. And so these three parameters, I think, are very, very foundational, and they're very, very fundamental to the success of VRA at the national grid level. However, I am also at AEDC, my job is to drive efficiency across the entire business. So I know that the best thing you can do for every idea you want to bring into the system is to run like a pilot. So you test it somewhere, see how those attributes pan out. So why not we look for, perhaps we can isolate a local ring, maybe a set of 132 networks, maybe somewhere around, if you take Kombotso, Kano, Dana Gunde in Kaduna, and one other station that is close within Kano, Katsina, and Kaduna, and perhaps ring those three and get a VRA plant injected in those places and see how that will pan out with the stability of the network before we begin to scale into the national network. So basically, I'm saying that we can start small with a local ring, perhaps at 132 level, test this process, test all that we have designed to see, then possibly replicate in the future. So those three are very, very critical.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. I mean, we're gleaning a lot of insights from this discussion. Thank you to our panelists. I'll go back to Dr. Yusuf because of time. We're trying to, move on. From your perspective, do you think decentralizing the grid by geopolitical zones would make VRA adoption a lot faster? What's your take on grid decentralization and then having your grids like zonal grid instead of the national central grid that we have today?
That's an interesting question, right? Because there was a reason why when all the grids of the world were being developed, they were developed as national grids, right? Partly a consideration of resource availability, where's the demand, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure that it's time for us to throw one away exclusively for the other, right? And I think there's an easy middle solution, right? What you have is you have new technologies that allow you to operate like grid islands, right? We have one, I gather, even though it came about accidentally, but we have one in Nigeria around Akwa Ibom. So if you notice, a lot of times when the grid collapses, TCN will claim and say, yeah, grid has collapsed, but it's partial collapse, right? Because in Ibom, around the Ibom axis, so there's a 132 network connected to the Ibom power plant that apparently a configuration, I don't know what they did, but they're able to create it to be able to run in island mode. So anytime the grid fails, the thing will turn off briefly, and then to now, but what you realize is that the main grid has a problem. It will now localize the supply from the power plant to just that local grid. So I think we've had discussions with the NISO. This is one of their priorities, to see how we can operate grid islands in the case of contingency, right? Obviously, what you have now is that a lot of production of Nigeria's power comes from either Niger State, right? About 2,000 megawatts in Niger State, or a lot of it is in South, right? A lot of it is in actually River State, right? So there's a large concentration of our generation resource. So I think it would be difficult to say we should all of a sudden just transition to like regional grids. And I'll challenge the principle. I think geopolitical zone is a socio-political construct, right? It's not necessarily tied to electricity, right? The way the network is configured and so on. So even though I agree with the principle that typically when you break problems down into smaller components, you have a better chance of solving them. But I'm not sure that geopolitical zone is the right separation, what's it called? Delineation methodology. I think when you sit down with the engineers, they can look at the history of how the network is configured, and they will then figure out what are the most viable island potentials that you have. And it might mean that it might cut across multiple geopolitical zones and so on. It doesn't really matter. But I think hopefully within the next 12 to 18 months, we'll have a concrete plan from the NISO on their analysis of how we can have island mode operation on the grid today. I think last we discussed, they said they're thinking of 3 islands, right? So if you have that situation, it means that if you have an island mode, you can integrate your VRE to work at the island level so that it doesn't introduce you reduce chance of it introducing, bad, what's it called, signals into the national grid and potentially put it at risk of collapsing.
Thank you so much. So that's giving more of a perspective of an interconnected kind of relationship between the zonal grid and the main grid. So you have like a sub grid and then a main grid where they are all connected together and they are still one grid, but they can still operate on their own. So that makes a lot of sense. So I'll just ask you, Engineer Moses, do you think there are any case studies globally that we can learn from with respect to zonal grids and all of that? And also, what is your take on also the question that I asked Dr. Yusuf just now?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of case studies that we can actually deploy. All right. So taking, for example, now net metering. Over here, we are not doing it. All right. And the reason is simply because we have poor bad grid infrastructure. So what we can actually do is to start small. I think he mentioned that, we don't have to start chasing 100 megawatts all of a sudden. We can start gradually, all right? And the net metering that you are talking about, once we have excess generation, you can feed it into the grid, just like engineer mentioned. But because of poor grid infrastructure, that cannot be happened. So if I have, for example, now an estate, all right, that I have buildings, I can do a roof mount on it. And a developer can actually go there, start self-generating. Thank God for the Electricity Act. You understand? I can be a developer. Anyone in this room can be a developer. You understand? So once I can self-generate, I can sell it to my potential off-takers. They can also sell it to themselves. This is applicable all over the country. So we can actually adopt that here. But we can actually, start small. It's not something we can take in a large capacity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Engineer Moses. I mean, this discussion has been really insightful. I really want to thank our panelists for, their insights so far. At this point, I think I want to allow the audience to chime in. If you have any questions or if you have any contributions you want to make, please feel free to just raise up your hands. For our online participants, you can also drop your questions in the chat room. I don't know if there's anyone that has any question that want to chime in. All right, there's someone here, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My question is to the doc from NERC. It seems to me that the Electricity Act kind of took almost everybody by surprise. And the way it's moving, how the industry is shaping up, and now implementing state electricity markets, isn't that going to further complicate plans, technically speaking and economically speaking? Because it sounds to me, again, that when you're having island mode, it's much more effective because you can't have states having their own systems and then you want to feed into another one. It becomes even more complicated. So how would you recommend we move forward? It could be personal. You don't have to speak on behalf of NERC. We could speak technically and just leave it at that. Thank you.
Are we taking
Yeah, should we? I think you can just attend to the question first.
All right, okay. Thank you very much for helping me put my disclaimer. So that applies to the beginning, everything I've said. I speak in my own personal capacity. I wasn't sent here by NERC. I think you raised a good question. The EA, I would say it was a surprise. I think it underwent extensive consultation because I think there had been agitation from the states from a long time that so I think the first thing that actually precipitated all of this was that in March of 2023, so I think section 14 of the Constitution, so when you look at the exclusive and concurrent list, there was something that said the states shall have, ability to make laws and whatever for areas not connected to the national grid. There was a not in the old Constitution. Now, what happened was that when we now looked at what is the national grid, the reality is that national grid is only 330 kilovolts, sorry, right? It's if my house is connected to the Disco's network, that's connected to the transmission network, connected to the GENCO, that is national grid. So as a result, it was interpreted that that provision effectively made the states unable to regulate on anything unless they went to a greenfield area where there was no existing infrastructure. So I think there was a clamor from them to amend that. So in 2023 March, the President Buhari assented to the change. And then arising from that, is when you now had the EA that was developed to provide a more robust thing. I think Nigeria is in a bit of a tricky situation, right? Because I think there are about 7 countries around the world that have this multi-tier regulatory frameworks within the power sector. So I think you have some in the US, Canada, India, I think Russia, Australia. I can't remember the 6th one. Now, in all of those places, all those countries I've mentioned, they're very different from Nigeria on a number of fronts. First and foremost, geographically, they are massive countries. I was telling someone yesterday, the whole of Nigeria fits into Texas, right? So these are very, very big countries. And so by being very big, there are complications around having just one system. In fact, in the US up until today, I think after there was there was a winter storm in Texas a few years ago. You found out that Texas is not part of there's no US grid in that sense. So in India, I think the first time the whole of India was connected to a national grid was 2012. Before then, they had operating regional grids. They had 4 zones that were, so basically what you had also was that the electricity market of those places actually originated bottoms up, whereby a state will develop its own electricity market when it feels like there's benefit to interconnect, to connect with the next state. So that's how regions were formed. And when regions then thought it was beneficial to interconnect nationally, that's why they had the national grid. In Nigeria, obviously, the electricity market was developed as a national system, right? And so what we're looking to do is now, what God has joined together, we're looking to put asunder, which is a bit complicated. Because if you look at it now, there are instances where 11 kV lines, so which are distribution lines, are crossing across states. So we're talking about now how you have to have meters on 11 kV lines to figure out what electricity is being traded in this state versus that state. However, the law is the law, right? And as Nigerians, we have no option but to abide by the law. I think my recommendation on how we go forward from this is that I think we have to appreciate the uniqueness of our circumstances. And that means that at the state level, once a state gets their regulatory independence, I would recommend, I was telling somebody earlier that also at the states, we're regulatory peers. There's no senior regulator, junior regulator. So we can't tell them what to do, right? We have our own jurisdiction. They have theirs. Obviously, the system is interconnected. So there's an impetus on all of us to work together. Because if our regulations are speaking a different language from their own regulations, it's bad for the operators, ultimately. So what I would recommend is that I think the first 18 months to 2 years of any new regulator, because even NERC itself is very young. I was telling somebody that, so NERC was from 2005, so it's 20 years this year. 2022 was the first time where a set of commissioners in NERC carried over to the next without a break. In the first one, there was, I think, an 18-month break between the first set of commissioners and the second set. Between the second set and the third set, there was a 2-year break. So I think as an institution itself, even NERC has not really, found its footing. So I think this complication of the states just makes it a bit more complicated in that sense. But I would say that every new regulator, I recommend that the first 18 months to 2 years, you should largely just follow what exists, right? Now, in that, if you find any obvious flaws, you can make those changes. But I think 2 years is enough time for you to have studied what currently exists, and then you can come with your own wholesale changes. Because another thing is that the state regulators have to be aware that the private companies that invested in the utilities, there were existing laws when they took over. What you don't want to do is that you don't want to change the regulatory regime so drastically that gives them a basis to file for change of law provisions, in which case they just return the asset to the government and say they're not doing it again, right? So I think all in all of us are still finding out. There's no one that can tell you the answer to this solution, to this problem, because it's very unique circumstances that we are in. But I think when you get yourself in these kind of situations, the best thing to do is to tread carefully, and then you sort of you make more evolutionary changes as against revolutionary changes.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other question or contribution?
Thank you for this insightful event. I think we've learned a lot from the engagements and how to move forward as a private sector player. My name is Umar Sheo Hashidu from Marbon Energy Limited. Yeah, so we're the concessionaires of 40 megawatts Dadinco hydropower plant. I find this very interesting because we are looking forward to how we hybridize our system with solar. And this particularly is what we're discussing here. And one of the key challenges we're looking at is the offtake. we all acknowledge here that the most bankable off-takers you have in the power sector is the CNI customers. But then with this new things coming up in the sector with the electricity market being decentralized, and sometimes you wonder how that would happen, because I operate in Gombe, and by the regulation, if you generate and sell your entire capacity within a state, your license becomes that of that particular state. And I wouldn't want to risk that volatility or uncertainty of being licensed by a state government. And that is a challenge for me. And another issue is to address intermittency in terms of supply in a bilateral agreement between an off-taker and a supplier. I look at it from this angle, that if a trader is involved who have different pool of suppliers, not only VRE, but then other hydros or that maybe thermals, he can be able to absorb that shock and provide just what Mbet is doing now. And then the trader would sign a contract with an off-taker who have specific needs. So when you have this volatility or intermittency in supply from the VRE, whatever you supply, a trader off-take, and then he provide that from the other pool of suppliers he has to provide that gap and then provide the flexibility and the balance that is needed. That's how I see it. And that's what prompted us as a company to look for innovative ways of entering into the market, knowing fully well that we may have that, because we have seasonal variations as a hydro. We're looking forward to see how we integrate with the VRE, particularly solar, to address that. But then even with that, without storage becomes an issue, because there are times. So, and then with storage becomes more expensive, right? So these are the challenges that we are looking at. And for the regulator, I don't know how we are, the question is, how do we navigate to see how we avoid being licensed by a state regulator? Not that I don't want to, but then I don't know the certainty of how far that would turn out to be. Because I'm more certain being with NAC, I've been there, done that. But then for the state regulations, just like the regulator just mentioned, we're not sure how it would be, because there are many challenges. We're not here to discuss that, but if we were to discuss that, is a topic on its own.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think you should be careful what you say. Maybe your regulator is here. You should be careful what you say. But no, I mean, I think you have so I think the principle, a few things are in your favor, right? The first thing is there's a national policy on hydroways, waterways. So I don't think there's any waterway that belongs to any state. It's a federal asset. So meaning that any activity that's undertaken on the waterways would be federally regulated by nature, right? That's my understanding of the law in that sense. Now, in terms of your power generation, the principle that we're working under is that any generation that is commingled with national grid will be nationally regulated. So what do I mean? If you sign a contract with somebody in even next door neighbor, let's say in Gombe, right? As long as your electrons get into the 132 or 330 network, there's no assurance that what the person is consuming is actually electrons coming from your own plant. Because when the thing gets commingled, you can't sort of like identify and say, oh, these electrons are from this plant and so on and so forth. So any Genco that is connected at 132 and above would remain a NERC licensee. Now, if you are doing trading activities within the state, you might have to deal with some of their regulatory issues. I think you guys are making some progress in passing the law in Gombe, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that is imminent. I think in terms of using solar to de-risk or to manage your, seasonality of your plant, I think it's a good idea. The good thing is, compared to the thermals, you're still cheaper. So if you have some more expensive technology to hybridize your plant, hopefully your weighted average cost will still be competitive. That's very important, because if it's not competitive, then you're going to be in trouble. And another benefit that I think it will bring to you is the fact that you can even then use it to manage the dispatch of your hydro plant, right? Because even during the rainy season, even in the dry season, of course, during daytime, you just tell them that they should take output only to match your solar production. and you can use your hydro to provide, the night off-peak demand and so on. I would tell you though that I think that you mentioned that traders can help you de-risk supply because they have a pool of suppliers. I would argue that discos can do the same, right? I think any off-taker, it's their responsibility to figure out what is the right blend of diverse supply that they have to be sure that this variability in their and seasonality of their suppliers is managed for their customers. But I think traders could be useful in the market primarily because of the financial problems that have been faced by the discos in terms of like creditworthiness. So I think in the near term, there might be some value in that, but we also have to be careful because introducing a middleman into the chain is more cost that has to pass on to consumers. So that's something that we actually have to consider as well.
So in that regard, my other concern is the discos may not be able to provide bank guarantees, which is the very challenges they are facing with embed currently. But once you have a trader in the middle who is willing to take that risk, provide you with the bank guarantee you need, at least that additional cost is justified somehow. But then for the discos, sometimes it's very hard for them to provide that, to lock up that money to provide bank guarantees for, and that's why we think. But then you may advise further on that.
I think bank guarantees are a tricky thing in that it's a comfort that everybody wants to have, but nobody ever wants to call upon it. Because once you call upon the guarantee the first time, the creditworthiness of the provider is dead. But that's been one of the issues that we faced in the sector, whereby there's been a general hesitance to call on the guarantees of the discos. Because once you call on the guarantee, so when you go to a bank to give a bank guarantee, in ideal clients, they will tell you, we'll give you the guarantee at a cost. You will put money down, they'll give you at a cost, just interest on top of it. The point is that, just like insurance, the moment you call upon it the first time, when they go back to the bank for the same guarantee, the premium will go up, which then sort of creates a vicious cycle whereby the guarantee will become too expensive to sustain and so on and so forth. So I think similar to the point I made earlier on the sustainability of the market, all of us have to be worried about the financial viability of the market. When the market is financially viable and liquid, guarantees, BGs, governments, PRGs, and so on will become just pieces of paper that people just have for comfort and never to be called upon. So I think in whatever transaction you're doing, you have to be careful. A trader, even a trader, it requires money from the disco, for example, to pay. The trader's plan is disco will make money, pay me, then I will pay you. The moment where the disco is able to pay the trader is not going to manufacture money from anywhere. One time they'll go to the bank and say, okay, call the DG, and then the DG will be called. But I tell you, once you call the DG one time, I call it a one-gun bullet. A one-bullet gun. Once you pull the trigger one time, then you won't, and the time you try to shoot it again, you won't see anything inside. So I think as you transactions, don't sort of like get carried away by the fact that the trader is providing a guarantee. You have to scrutinize the fundamentals of who they are selling on to. Because if that person cannot pay you, a point to come the trader to also default on the transaction.
Thank you so much.
One of the things some traders are also looking at now is speaking with potential off-takers and identifying networks. So basically, you ring-fence a network that has an established performance criteria that gives you the comfort that you need. Say, for example, you identify, say, Maitama 33 kV feeder, and Maitama is coming from Katankwe, so your plant is in Gombe. So you sit with AEDC and say, look, now your weighted average tariff here, say 130, for example. My energy, I'm going to set you at 120 or 115. Then we'll have a 15 naira. So basically, whether there's an issue with embed or whatever is happening is not, so you've insulated Maitama from the entire market risk. So basically saying, I generate in Gombe, pump on the grid, take it from Katakwe, and I sell it to Maitama. So I'm not saying giving to AEDC to take to Lafia, but I'm taking it to Maitama. So you use the Maitama model books to justify the partnership. That way, you may not necessarily need a bank guarantee. So that sort of innovative arrangement can also give you the comfort you need. But it depends on the quantum of power you want to sell anyway. Yeah.
Thank you so much, panelists. My question is for Engineer Emmanuel. My name is Engineer Francis from CSolar. You mentioned on grid integration, one of your recommendations would be comprehensive study on grid segmentation and injection points, amongst other things. So what obstacles do you see as to implementation? Because most times we have this, I'm sure there are current studies already ongoing, and previous studies have been done on power in Nigeria generally. So what obstacles do you see, and how do you feel best to be able to overcome them to implement? Because I think implementation would actually be a big stumbling block to achieving more. And also collaboration with academia, particularly regarding this area of studies. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first obstacle I can tell you, the first challenge that the sector basically has currently is that we have a lot of policies, we have a lot of regulatory requirements that you must first to, hurdles that you must have to surpass first. And while you are doing those negotiations, the finance that you've gotten is already running. All right. So basically is navigating the various regulatory requirements and certification that you need to make the investment is the first challenge. And that is also has been complicated by not complicated, all right. Perhaps maybe in the long run, it's going to be making more smoother and faster with the subnational market that is coming in. So there's a lot of, we have some states now that NEC has given regulatory oversight to, that NEC may not want to make decisions on their behalf. But those states are also not very much ready to even give you the framework that will enable you to do those investments. So the regulatory constraints are a significant concern that you have, because other than that, if you have your money and you have your model, and I mean your schematics, everything has indicated that this plant would likely work, then it will work. You're so basically saying that it's a regulatory bottlenecks that you need to, that's the biggest obstacle that I think will hinder your pace on terms of implementation of those initiatives.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's about it from the room here. I just wanted to read out somebody's, not necessarily a question, but a comment online. Her name is Chidima Ono. She said, NERC made mistakes when they came on board, and I suggest that the state should be allowed to regulate and grow their electricity markets. The state electricity may make their mistakes, but they will learn along the way. Even the best electricity regulated systems in the world have their issues to deal with. All we need to do as Nigerians is bridge the frequent grid collapses, and the state market is here to bring up innovative ways to grow their state electricity markets. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything to this.
I can tell you for free that the market as it is currently constituted is a market that is, the SBT, for example, does not have appetite for mistakes. All right. The reason why I say it doesn't have appetite for mistakes is that basically the entire market does not have appetite for mistakes. And that is why I agree with what the commissioner said, that the subnational market should be patient enough to spend time in simulating all the ideas and ensure that it is, to a large extent, the failure rate is significantly reduced. Because I mean, you can't, like the gentleman from Mabon has gone to raise capital, he has done a significant investment, he's already producing energy, and his plan is supposed to be for 35 years. And someone come from somewhere, come up with a policy that will just, so it doesn't give comfort to other people. We are a country of 200 plus million. We are conveniently trading now about 4,000 megawatts when it comes from a commercial context. We need close to conservatively 70,000 megawatts. So the policies, the decisions that are being made now, a lot of the potential investors are also watching what is happening. So if you don't do the right thing, or if you don't make the right framework that can give comfort to everybody, you get stagnated at the 4,000 megawatts.
Engineering, I think to say it very simply is that experience is not always the best teacher, to be honest. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on this note, I think I'll just allow our panelists to give their recommendations and final words as we wrap up. Thank you so much. So yeah, Dr. Yusuf, you can start.
All right. I think I'll just close by highlighting some of the things I said earlier. I think it's good for Nigeria to be ambitious on the energy transition program, but I think we should embed our ambition in our realities, right? I mean, Nigeria has one of the cleanest grids today. Hydro, 20%, gas, 80%. Around the world, gas is even a transition fuel, right? So I think that, yes, we don't want to be stuck in the past so that when the transition happens, we'll be left behind. But I think we shouldn't lose focus of what is important. And what is important today is that we need to create a market that is commercially viable and technically resilient. I think once you do all of those things, these technologies will just come and be added upon, right? That's why you don't see that countries worried about, oh, I want to bring in wind, and then we have to do something radical, because you have a strong base, right? So I think as we sort of like seek to address some of these challenges, I would address it from the perspective of less of the fundamentals. Because once you have a good foundation, layering on new technologies, you won't need to have any big meeting or anything. Because if you are commercially viable, people that have new technologies will come and say they want to invest in you. No stories. If you have a good grid, right, the integratability of those new technologies will also be very straightforward. It's because they're trying to cut some shortcut to say, oh, our grid is weak. Is there any way we can do this one? That's not going to get us anywhere. So I think we just need to ground our ambition, as I said, in our realities today and the priorities. And I'm confident that once we have the good foundation, we'll be sort of set up on a path for long-term sustainable growth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf. Engineer Emmanuel?
Yeah. So for me, I think, like I said initially, I am a firm believer of starting small, learn your lessons, and scale. And so for me, I would want to recommend that approach should be leveraged on. You can decide to, we have regions, we have transmission regions in Nigeria, not geopolitical regions, we have transmission regions. So you can take a region that is not as fragile as the other region, and of course, simulate this and see how it pans out, then see how we can scale to the national grid. Second thing for me is that government should understand that their role in this process is very, very key. So they should, do some basic things that prepare enough ground for the PPP to be able to thrive. All right. For example, we talked about IRP earlier. We talked about, being interested even in the process of adopting VRE to your network, whether VRE or DER, whichever one that you can accommodate for now. You begin to look at how to systematically adopt them in. So, but government needs to be involved. Then the last thing for me is that we have all looked at the market. Of course, we are bringing in renewables or bringing in investment. It's on an existing market. So we have looked at the market. We also feel that we should be very, while we want to, we're in a hurry to get the market to thrive, we'll also be very mindful of the fact that errors at this moment is going to be very, very tantamount to destroying the entire market. So let's be very careful, take it one at a time, but sustainable and well streamlined objective as to how to grow the market is what I would recommend to the entire market.
Thank you so much, Engineer Emmanuel. Engineer Moses?
Yeah, for me, I would like to say we should try and bridge the technical gap, all right? Because you realize that the solar IPPs that we have today has only been for a short period of time, probably 2 years or 3 years. If you go to the solar farm, everything is just a waste, So once the technical gap is bridged, we'll be able to understand the VRE processes. We'll be able to understand the quality of the component that makes up the VRE that we need to get, all right? Now, JA, for example, now we pride ourselves of a high quality module, that has a better degradation period. So when you have that in mind, you know that the panel that I'm procuring should last me for 25 years and not just 2 or 3 years. So when you factor in that into your design, then you know that the installation that you are doing is here to start. So I feel once we're able to bridge the technical gap, then we are good to go. And secondly, I would say the market is there, and a lot of people usually say that viability, when viability is, they said that viability need to become bankability for you to execute the project. So once you're able to factor in those efficiencies, then you have that to work with.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. A few more people sent questions. Do you want to take them or should we?
Let's take them.
All right, okay. Okay, there's somebody, Kinsley. My name is Kinsley from Marbon Limited. I just want to commend the speakers for a job well done. And just to add to what the NERC commissioner explained about the island mode operations during grid instability, recently this was demonstrated during a major transmission outage. While several cities in the region experienced total blackouts, the Dadinkowa hydropower plant continued to supply uninterrupted power. Okay, so this person is just reinforcing what she said earlier on. All right, somebody named John said, how do you think the state can survive or pick up immediately without having its generator and lines? We all know the obsolete nature of the distribution lines. How do you think embedded generation can work? Well, I think we already mentioned this earlier on with respect to, aging infrastructure and investing in terms of putting investments with respect to infrastructure. I think we handled that earlier on. And then somebody named Abdulwasiu said, when you are expecting investments of other people's money, there is no margin for error. So I align with Dr. Yusuf's suggestion that the state regulators should stick to what they have already done, what NERC has already done within the first 18 to 24 months. So that's all online. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And I think as a way to recap, I'll just highlight things that have, come up regularly in these conversations. And the very first one is the need for SCADA deployments, the need to invest in advanced SCADA and be able to monitor data real time on the network. I think with or without VRE, we've established that that is very, very needed in our CCN network today. And thank God, Dr. Yusuf already told us that something is coming up with respect to a SCADA policy and all of that. We've also established that there's an important need for a handshake between, the public sector and the private sector. Those partnerships have to happen. I mean, the public sector need to, help the private sector see that they can put their investment in this and they would actually recoup their money. So there has to be enabling environment to ensure that these investments actually happen. We also established that there's a need to assess the grid. I mean, that also came up very frequently, that if you want to even, before you start to think of injecting VRE into the grid, there has to be a grid assessment. Where is the grid currently today? What areas are we going to inject to if we say we want to take this up? So that study, a grid study, has to happen. We also said that, Dr. Yusuf mentioned that we have a couple of policies, for example, the NIP, SIP. He said, aside having policies, we have to be able to implement and put those policies to the ground, get it working. I think that's something we really also need to pick up from here. One other thing that came up is the fact that, we have to have pilots. So fine, you have a big dream, you have 1,000 and something gigawatts of renewable energy that you want to inject into the grid, but you have to start small, do a pilot. Like Engineer Emmanuel said, what areas on the grid do you consider, not so fragile that we can run a small pilot on before we start to think of, scaling to the large scale? And then finally, I just want to end with what Dr. Yusuf also said with respect to being realistic about your situation in Nigeria today with respect to your mix, your renewable energy mix. Do you really need to go all the way out? And even if you need to go all the way out, make sure that you're not just cutting an arm and a leg to get it done. People have done things outside Nigeria, but let's contextualize based on what we currently have today and how to make sure that the fundamentals, first of all, work before we start to think of building skyscrapers on a foundation that is faulty. So I think that is what's, part of the things that we've learned today among the plenty other things that we've learned. And on this note, I really want to say a very big thank you to all our panelists, to you, our participants, for, taking the time both to share your insights with us and even for participating today. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf. Thank you, Engineer Emmanuel. Thank you, Engineer Moses. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Electricity Hub right now.
I think we should step down. Let's step down.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. While they are taking their pictures, I'm just going to give the closing remarks. This has been an impactful session. The dynamic of the conversation is immensely going to impact the way the report is going to go on going forward. The questions you asked were also very intelligent, very educative. Basically, the engagement in the room today has okay. The engagement in the room today has highlighted some questions we already noted down in the report that, oh, we need to know more about this. So, and I know I said that we're going to put up the QR code so you can scan it, but I think the timing for the QR code is expired. So what we're going to do is we have your email address if you've registered. If you've not registered, please register so we can send you the reports once it's concluded. Thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget to take your refreshment at the back. And I won't say good night because normally Power Dialogue is usually in the night, but we made it earlier in the day today. So enjoy your trip back to your offices, to your homes, and have a lovely day ahead. Thank you.